Okay, laps at Rockingham. There's going to be quite a bit going on here because both ends of the track are very different from one another. The approach at both ends couldn't be any more different. The rock sign into turn one, that sign that we just passed right there, you're going to want to lift a little bit after that. About 30% max brake pressure into there, trailing through the center, as you'll see by the inputs on the bottom of the screen. Turn 3 lifting slightly before the rock sign, not trailing nearly as long with the brake into the corner, and then throttling up much more quickly. Again, getting right out to that wall and entry and lifting right past the rock sign. Try not to hit the fence like I did right there. Trying to really get that front end to cut back down the hill to exit. You enter low, slide up a little bit in the center, and then exit back down low. So it's critical to make sure that you've shaved off enough speed in the center so that you can get some good front turn and get a straight shot back down on exit. If you rush throttle, you run the risk of slipping the fronts and sliding the front, or slipping the rear and getting really loose on exit. You do that multiple laps in a row, and by lap 20 or 30, you will have no tires left. So as we continue on here, just continue to pay close attention to the throttle and brake input at the bottom. You'll notice using a lot of partial throttle at both ends of the track and not rushing to get to full throttle. This is to preserve those rear tires. Little free roll in the center of 1 and 2, followed by a lot of partial throttle, committing to 100% at about the 3/4 mark. Early turning into 3 so that I can get the left sides close to that yellow paint. Not quite on it, just a little bit above it. We used to run right on the paint, but with the bumps down there now, it's not really easy to carry throttle through that section, so we run a little bit higher than we used to compared to the Gen 6. So watch those bumps for sure. Trailing brake off, feeding it throttle very early in turn 3 and really driving out of the corner with lots of throttle. Much more aggressively getting back to the throttle in 3 than I do in 1 and 2. You'll notice a good amount of wheel input in the center of the corner, a good handful of wheel turn to the left as we approach our minimum corner speed. As long as you've gotten the speed shaved off and you've got good front turn to begin with, you can use a good amount of wheel lock to get your front pointing in the center of both corners. And for the first 20 laps or so, I'll keep it on the bottom. As the run progresses, as I get to about lap 21 or so, in my 30 lap runs to keep it consistent, I've been moving up to the top at both ends. You'll probably want to keep it as low. You want to keep it low for as long as possible in your races to preserve the tires, but there is a lot of lap time to be made up top. So make sure that in the lead up to racing next week that you definitely practice that top, because you will have to go there at some point. Dynamic tracks and the amount of cars and weather and track conditions, they will definitely affect how the rubber gets laid down and how much you have to move around, but you definitely won't be planted on the bottom the whole race for sure. So I'll keep it quiet here for another 5 laps or so. It's going to be much more of the same. Good amount of brake pressure at both ends. Pay attention to the lift points, the turn-in points, where I'm placing the car, and I'll come back to you at around lap 15 or so. Coming to complete 15 laps here, you'll notice that the lap times are not falling off a lot. From the beginning of the run to the end of the run, there's about a half a second of fall off. Best outright lap time I can achieve with this setup, which is up top at both ends, is a 23:02, starting my race runs in the high ones, low twos, and completing them in the mid sixes. So depending on which lap time you say is your fastest of the run, you're going to be anywhere between probably 4 to 5 tenths of fall off in 30 laps. Feels like it's going to start to potentially accelerate after that as the tires cross certain wear and temperature thresholds, but regardless, this is not going to be like in Atlanta where you have to sit back and save 3 or 4 tenths of lap time for the first 10 or 15 laps to have anything to race with. You can definitely press, but again, going back to things that I talked about at the beginning of this run, just really focusing on not sliding the fronts on entry to center and not sliding the rear and exit. You can see a few times off of turn 2 I've had to give it a good handful of counter steer to settle the rear back down. It's very easy to do here. We don't have as much horsepower as we used to, but with all the bumps and the underbody making contact with the track and the tires heating up a little bit too, the exits at both ends can definitely get a bit touch and go as far as getting loose. So taking lap 19 here, you see we're really just getting it down to the bottom early in turn 3. Making sure that we're not shoving the front, only using enough throttle to where I'm not overloading those front tires. Throttle and wheel are working in conjunction with one another, constantly making micro corrections with all of the inputs to make sure that I'm keeping the car as tidy as possible while making lap time. Coming around to complete lap 20 here, still in the 23.5s comfortably. Now again, for consistency's sake, I'm going to move up to the top at both ends to complete the last 10 of this 30 lap run. So you'll notice it's a much deeper drive into the entry of the corner, later on the brakes, earlier on the throttle. You can really use a lot more throttle up top at both ends. Entry to turn 3 is pretty unique. When you run the top, you kind of enter a lane or so off the bottom and you just walk it up the track and you exit up top. In turn 1, you'll notice that I'll enter in about the second groove, right about there in the rubber, slide up to the top in the middle, and then cut it back down. Turn 3, I'll enter really deep, very little brake compared to turn 1. Enter about a groove off the bottom, and then just float it up to the top, and plant that throttle and come up off the corner. Exit high. 1 and 2 is a diamond, 3 and 4 is almost a slider line. You enter close to the bottom, slide up to the top, throttle up, and get going. Again, super easy to get the car upset over the bumps up top, especially with carrying more throttle and more speed. So really be cognizant of what that diffuser is telling you, what you're getting from maybe your throttle rumbler or your force feedback. Just make sure you're taking all of the feedback you have and making good decisions based on that. You'll notice here, starting to get a little bit tight on entry. It's definitely a trait of this car right now. Hopefully we can make it a little bit better as we get closer to the beginning of the week. But that is kind of a characteristic of Rockingham. To have good drive off, you have to keep it a little bit more on the snug side. And front turn on entry can definitely suffer later, especially when we're driving in deeper and trying to carry more throttle. So just be aware of that. If you get tight on entry, you can always dial some brake pressure back or just move that braking point up a bit. And still in the 23.4s, so actually I've clawed some lap time back compared to where I was at 20, but we'll start to get back in the 5s here and eventually fade off into 6s to end the run. Really at the limit of the front tires right there. If this was a race run, I probably would be driving this car a little bit easier, not making so much lap time, not being so aggressive with the line. Because those fronts are scrubbing. The wear was a little bit rear biased on this run. I was 86, 84 right front, right rear, so we still were wearing a bit loose, but the tightness on entry was definitely limiting what I could do a little bit, as you could see right there, as I just give the wall a kiss. But that's going to happen this week. You got to get comfortable up there, and like I said, it's inevitable that you'll have to run up there and make some lap time at some point. Super fun, super risky. Coming to start lap 28 with 3 laps to go in this run. Don't do that either. Very easy to do. You want to get as close to that wall as possible in entry to extend your angle into the corner, whether you're running top or bottom. And the curvature of the front stretch makes it easy to kiss that wall at entry, so just be aware of that. Sliding all the way up to the top in 3 and 4. Big throttle on corner exit. 2 laps to go in this run. Definitely fighting for some front turn, but managing by taking some brake bias back and entering a little bit lower, backing up the braking point a little bit. And coming to take the final lap. Again, running the top, lifting well past that rock sign, carrying good speed on entry so I can carry speed center off. A little bit loose on throttle there, which was good compared to the tightness I was experiencing the few laps before that. Right up to the wall and back down on exit. That's 30 laps at Rockingham at what I would say is a little bit quick for a race pace. I think you would definitely want to slow it down a little bit more early on to ensure that you've got some good tire left later. Front and rear we're wearing fairly neutral. Like I said, 86, 84, so a small split. But it's critical to not overdrive entry when you're running the bottom the first 20 laps. Really back up those entry points. Use the rock signs on the wall into 1 and 3 as a guide. Again, we're lifting before the rock sign into 3, just past it into 1. And as you watch this replay and then watch it back, hopefully, look at those inputs at the bottom left. Look at the wheel, look at the throttle, look at what I'm doing. Hear what I'm saying as we go back through this and try to put it all together. There's a lot of time to be made up this week in places that you probably don't think it can be made up. And it doesn't really come from driving the car harder. It's about being smoother and maximizing what you can do with the car while staying within the limits of the tire. The harder you try, the slower you'll probably go. So keep that in mind, and you should have a successful week at Rockingham.